My name is Varun with UCAN. Been with the brand for a long time now, and maybe some of you have seen me doing these before. We want to get back to doing some more of these sessions for you because we find that we're getting a lot of questions about UCAN. There's a lot of kind of conversation about how UCAN is different from other products, how sort of UCAN jives with some of the fueling recommendations that we're hearing out there when it comes to sugar-based products. So yeah, want to talk through all that stuff with you guys today and provide an overview of what UCAN's all about and how to think about the different products. And while we do that, let's kind of start first by maybe just understanding a little bit more about who we have here. Whoops. Let's try that again. There we go. Sorry, guys, bear with me while I deal with these technical difficulties. Let me share again. Um, Great. Hopefully you guys can see what's on my screen. Before we get started, and you can see on the screen what we'll cover today, I wanted to get just a feel for who we have in our audience. So I'm going to just give you guys a couple polls. The first one being how many times have you used UCAN, just to understand the experience level. Can see the results coming in here on the screen. Interesting. We've got a lot of really experienced UCAN users, people who've used the product more than 5 times. Got a couple new folks with us, and then a couple folks ranging right in the middle. That is very good. And then just a second question that I will ask folks on is just to get a sense of what type of athletes we have in here. So this is a multiple choice one. What activities do you currently participate in? You can select as many of them that apply to you. As expected, got a whole bunch of runners in here, some triathletes, cyclists, got a CrossFitter in here. Do CrossFit myself, so welcome. UCAN is definitely something that I use in terms of the Edge gels before any type of CrossFit workout. Works really well. And we've got some people doing other activities. Okay, awesome. Well, that was great. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, we want to talk about how and when to use each UCAN product. We're going to talk about what makes UCAN different from sugary fuels. We'll talk about fueling strategies from 5Ks to marathons, but we'll also hit on triathlon and just general workouts as well, like CrossFit, like we talked about. And then we're going to just highlight a few ways to use UCAN for energy in everyday life. We will leave some questions, some time for questions at the end as well. So like I said, if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat and I will answer them either at the end or along the way, if it makes sense. So with that said, just starting off in terms of understanding UCAN and kind of the main principles behind it and how it works, it comes down to Live Steady. So Live Steady is the unique ingredient in UCAN products. It's a slow releasing carbohydrate. It's derived from starch instead of sugar. And what's really interesting about this carbohydrate, this starch-based carbohydrate, is its origin. So UCAN, it was originally developed as a medical food for Jonah, one of our co-founder's sons, who had a very rare blood sugar disease. So kids with this condition had to be fed every 2 hours, day and night, to maintain a stable level of glucose, a stable level of energy. And if they weren't fed, it was catastrophic. They could suffer, severe hypoglycemia, and the results would be really bad. So his parents, from the time he was born, had to wake up every 2 hours and feed Jonah every 2 hours, and they basically were feeding him a cornstarch, because this was one of the few carbohydrate sources these kids could metabolize and convert into glucose. So it was very much a life by the clock, and his family spearheaded research and ultimately discovered a cooking technology that, when you apply it to starch, causes it to break down much more slowly and steadily over time. So 2009, Jonah and kids like him were able to take the starch prior to sleeping at night, and it kept their glucose steady throughout the night for 8 to 10 hours while they were sleeping. So essentially, they didn't have to be fed over and over and over again anymore. That was an incredible discovery, and really all that this carbohydrate was meant to do. But 2009, we started wondering, hey, what would happen if people who were exercising or active or didn't have this condition took this starch? How would they respond to it? And we conducted a clinical trial on trained cyclists, and we basically tested the UCAN starch against maltodextrin, which was sort of the premier carbohydrate that's being used in a lot of sports nutrition products at the time in mid to late 2000. And we found a more stable glucose response during exercise, a more even and level blood sugar with this live steady starch compared to maltodextrin, which is sort of a more complex form of sugar. So ultimately, that's what pushed us into sports nutrition. At the time, we were testing the product with some top athletes, Mebka Flesgy, Boston Marathon winner in 2014, New York City Marathon winner, four-time Olympian. He was one of the first athletes to use the product, and he really liked UCAN because it was a more even energy burn and a lot easier on his stomach than sugars. You know, he was 35 or 36 at the time, and he was finding that he was having trouble digesting sugar during his run. And so he found that he was able to preload with the UCAN. We only had a powdered product at the time, and it was a much more even, stable burn of energy. So in 2010, UCAN launched. We only had powders at the time. Some of you in here who have been using the product, who said that you've used the product more than 5 times. Maybe you've been with us from the early days since we only had powders, but UCAN was really founded and launched because we had this unique starch-based carbohydrate that was very different in terms of how it delivered energy and the fueling and the timing and sort of how frequently you needed to take it. It was sort of very different than your traditional sports nutrition products. And really the key features that I've kind of talked through of this live steady starch is that it delivers energy steadily without the spikes and the crashes. So you don't feel the highs and lows. For people who've used UCAN, this is something you've probably experienced. It also digests very easily before and during exercise. The starch is an incredibly complex, large molecule. It doesn't require a high volume of fluid to digest like a lot of sugar-based products. So the digestion is a lot easier and a lot smoother. And then finally, it supports metabolic efficiency and glucose control. You know, this whole product was founded because it uniquely stabilizes and controls blood glucose. And controlling your glucose is really one of the foundations to being successful during exercise and even just maintaining long-term metabolic health. But as an endurance athlete, as a runner or triathlete, like many of you are, when your glucose is steady, it means your energy is steady, right? When we think about bonking, when we think about the brain fog or sort of the loss of focus during exercise. A lot of that is due to fluctuations in blood sugar, which can come from either not fueling or fueling with a lot of sugary, fast energy sources that kind of require you to ride that wave and keep up with them and kind of time it very perfectly. Whereas when your glucose is controlled, you have that level and even feeling of energy. A lot of people find that with UCAN, because it controls your glucose, it reduces the reliance on frequent refueling. You just don't have to do it as often. Now we'll talk through this a little bit. That doesn't always necessarily mean you're taking in less, though some people find they are taking in less with UCAN relative to sugary fuels. But for others, it might just mean you can take in more at less frequent intervals. Like oftentimes, if you think about it, right, you're not going to sort of load up with one or two or three gels all at once, right? People, those sugary, fast acting fuels, both because of digestion and because of the way it works, that it's not designed to sort of take in a lot and then have it last for a long time. But whereas with UCAN, sometimes with the fueling strategy, you could load up with multiple servings of UCAN and then be good for a while because of that consistent, even release of energy. But yeah, getting back to glucose control, it also helps optimize fat oxidation in long-term efforts. So when your blood glucose is stable, your body is better able to tap into and burn fat for fuel. And, we're always, especially like when you're doing this long zone 2 training, you are relying on fat and you want to become efficient at utilizing and burning fat. And we showed this in our clinical trial because it's coming in very slowly and very steadily, it's not interfering with your body's metabolism and your ability to tap into that fat for fuel. Where when you're constantly dumping those simple sugars into your body, you're using those immediately, and then your body's wanting more of them. And then finally, I've talked about this before, but for a lot of us, whatever sport you're doing, we're in this for longevity. We're in this for health. We're in this to be able to do this our activity for a long time, and that's what we want. And when our glucose is all over the place and not stable, then it kind of is going to mess with your long-term metabolic health. And I just want to see if I can play this video and see if you guys can hear it. It's a short video, but somebody posted this on social media the other day, and I did think it was pretty interesting on this idea of glucose control. So let's give it a whirl and see if it works.
I recently made the switch to UCAN after meeting with a sports dietitian about my climbing A1C and what I could do about it. If you didn't know, using some of the other fuelings are 100% sugar, so they are going to cause your blood sugar levels to spike and crash. Some people are going to be more sensitive to that than others. This has kept my blood sugar numbers nice and even keel throughout all of my long runs, giving me sustained energy without those glucose spikes.
So that's sort of a lot of people who train a lot and run a lot, they obviously feel very fit. They have great endurance. But if you're always taxing your body and your glucose is kind of all over the place because you're continuously fueling with a lot of sugars, it can, have that long-term metabolic impact on your A1C, even if you don't expect it. And this is something that we have had more and more runners tell us that, like, hey, when I consulted with a sports dietitian or and was fueling with a lot of sugars, like I was finding my glucose, my fasting glucose and my A1C, getting a lot higher. So it's not a sole fix, but it can be smartly implemented during exercise to have better glucose control and contribute to better metabolic health in the long term. So yeah, those are sort of the main defining features that set UCAN apart and make it unique. And like I mentioned, it all really does come back to this live steady carbohydrate, this live steady starch. So let's kind of dive into the different UCAN products and talk through how to use them. So when we think about UCAN and the different products, and the different opportunities to use them, these are kind of the most common things we see. So certainly before training, the powders, the gels, and the bars, and we'll get into each one more specifically and kind of talk through the nuances of them. But the powders, the gels, and the bars are all great before training. They all contain the live steady starch as the primary carbohydrate. So they're all designed to give you that easy to digest, consistent, long lasting energy. I often tell people to think of UCAN as like food-based energy, the same way you would time a snack or a meal 30 to 60 minutes before activity or before you exercise. That's very similar to how you can think of UCAN, but again, there's no risk of this sitting heavy in your stomach, right? So even take the energy powder as an example, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a bit, but the energy powder, it's 20 grams of the live steady starch, 20 grams of carbs, and pretty comparable in terms to a packet of oatmeal, right? Most oatmeal is about 20 grams of carbs per packet, and it's that same kind of like even food-based energy, kind of your energy base before a workout. But it would be very tough to slam a bowl of oatmeal and get out the door in 30 minutes. So UCAN is kind of like your sports nutrition version of that and fits in really, really well pre-exercise to give you that strong, even base of energy. People take UCAN in lieu of food or they take UCAN with food. It kind of depends on the length of your effort. If you're doing an hour workout, if you're running a 5K, you might not need to eat breakfast and have UCAN, right? Like UCAN alone could suffice. It's perfectly fine to take on an empty stomach. It'll give you that base of energy, and then you can eat, your food post workout. If you're doing a longer effort, a long run, people might like to wake up early or just a couple hours before their long run, have a meal, have breakfast, and then kind of on top of that, have UCAN as their carb source 30 minutes before your workout. So it works great in either instance. In terms of the powder, gel, and bar, like it really is kind of preference. I would say if you're doing something that's really high intensity, like the gel or the powder is going to be really, really good because it doesn't have much else in it. It's primarily just carbohydrates and some electrolytes. So it's going to be really, really smooth and light and easy on your stomach. If you're doing something longer or something that's lower intensity, the bar is really good. It's still got the same live steady starch, but it's going to have some protein and fat to keep you satiated for that longer effort. And again, if you're doing it at a lower intensity, then you're not so worried about those extra stuff messing with your stomach. So that's how I would think about the pre-application use of training use of UCAN. And it's really one of the most important times to fuel with UCAN. You know, so many times people are like really caught up in what should I consume during my workout. But if you're well fueled before a workout, you know, many times anything under like 90 minutes, you may not even need to fuel during. You know, of course, it certainly depends on the type of workout, the intensity, your own metabolism. But yeah, I think for a lot of people, if they're fueled up well with a serving or two of UCAN prior to a workout, then that can take care of a lot of the during fueling needs until we get into the longer stuff. Now let's talk about UCAN during the longer efforts. So, and let's see, I have a few questions coming in here, so I'll just quickly pull this up and see if um, here, right, we'll come to these questions here at the end. So the in terms of the products during the longer effort. So with the gels, the powders and bars, you know, really the use is roughly every 45 to 60 minutes. But you can really adjust as needed. So this is where things get, you know, interesting. So I think right now there's a lot of conversation around, like high carb fueling and you know training your gut, pushing the envelope. Like you can take up to 90 grams of carbs or 120 grams of carbs per hour. So people often wonder, like, how does UCAN fit into this whole conversation? And do I need to be taking, you know, 3 or 4 servings of UCAN if I'm trying to hit that threshold? What I would say is you can't, a lot of those recommendations and studies are based on sugar based carbohydrates, and they're also being done on people at the highest end of performance, right? So they're in at you know really high intensity and really efficient carbohydrate burners, really going all out full throttle for the entire effort. And that's not really reflective of what everybody's doing. With a lot of people, you know, we have success starting with 1 serving of UCAN per hour, which is roughly 20 grams of carbs, and then certainly adjusting up as needed. So, you know, we have elite athletes like Emma Bates, pro marathon runner. She takes 3 UCAN gels per hour. She runs, you know, a 220 and change marathon. And for her, that's about 60 grams of carbs per hour. And that's what she needs at the pace and intensity she's going. And for her, it works really well because she wasn't able to take in that level of carbohydrate per hour with sugar. It would just mess with her stomach when she was trying to do that over the course of an entire marathon. So there's people like that who find that like, hey, UCAN allows me to follow that higher carb fueling plan. There's other folks, you know, a lot. So one of our clinical studies, it's an isotope tracer study, and we had people on a treadmill running at a 4-hour marathon pace, and we were basically able to tell how much of our live steady starch they were utilizing per hour at 4-hour marathon pace. And it was shown that they were utilizing about 12 to 15 grams at that pace per hour, you know, and they were able to maintain their pace. Their blood sugar was very even. So for a lot of people, depending on your pace, your intensity, you know, 1 serving of UCAN per hour might be sufficient. And you know, for other folks, again, you can just slightly adjust that up. You could do a serving every 45 minutes. If you're using the drink, you know, then and you're preloading with the drink, then some people, you know, might preload with 1 to 2 servings before, and then that'll sort of extend the period with they need to take the first dose during their effort. So I would say start with one, you know, every 45 to 60 minutes and then adjust as needed. And again, what I really, really love about UCAN is it fits into both the high carb approach and the controlled carb approach of fueling. It's really based on what you individually want to do that works best for you. We'll talk again a little bit more about the specific products and some tips and tricks and some of the nuances. Post workout, the UCAN Protein Plus Energy, 20 grams of protein per serving. It's still got the carbohydrate from the Live Steady starch. It's going to keep your energy nice and steady, plus give you the protein for recovery. And then for daily use, you know, the protein, the bars, and the hydration all work really, really well in that regard. Let's dive in a little bit more into each product. So when we talk about the UCAN gels, again, I think the big conversation is the amount of carbs in the gel and how long it lasts. And again, like we just kind of talked through, that's very individual and can certainly be customized. But I think across the board, we've seen people, kind of who are more in that 3.5 to 5 hour marathon pace or 5+ hour marathon pace tell us that it's somewhere between 1 to 2 per hour. The Edge gels are available with and without caffeine. So there's 4 fruit flavors of the Edge without caffeine. There's 3 sort of not savory, I should say, more like indulgent, excuse me, flavors, the mocha, vanilla latte, and salted caramel that have caffeine. With the Edge, especially the fruit flavors, they're so different in consistency and texture than a traditional gel. So they're definitely more like a smoothie like consistency, almost a little bit like they don't have dairy in them, but a little bit even like yogurty, like drinkable yogurt, but not that thick, sticky gel, sort of that you're used to, not the traditional gel consistency. So one of the beauties of the UCAN Edge gels, especially the fruit flavored ones, is that they don't need to be chased with water. Now, that's not to say they hydrate you. They simply, because of the way their consistency, their texture, and because of the way the starch digests, you don't need a certain volume of fluid like you do with sugar-based gels in order to get these to digest. And that's huge for a lot of people from a convenience standpoint, from a timing standpoint. You can't always, if you're not hand carrying your water, especially in a race, you can't always rely on running past that and having access to that water stop right at the right time where you want to fuel. So sort of being able to de-link the fuel and the hydration from each other, it's a benefit that people really find with the UCAN gels. In terms of the caffeinated gels, for those of you that have tried them, you may notice that the texture and the consistency is going to be a little bit thicker on the caffeinated gels. It's still the same idea, though. It's the live steady start, so it's going to give you that stable base of energy from carbohydrates, and then the 75 milligrams of caffeine per gel. That's as much as a cup of coffee. You are really going to feel that immediate boost, and that's where it's really actually quite unique and different from sort of the traditional energy feeling that you get from UCAN. With UCAN, it's like something that you don't necessarily feel immediately when you take this, but it's something that's going to be more sort of you feel the the fact that you're not falling off a cliff or not crashing, 30 minutes or 45 minutes in, like you're able to maintain that good feeling versus feeling a surge from UCAN. But with the caffeinated gels, that's something where because of the amount of caffeine, it will give you that immediate mental boost. So this is a great, definitely a great morning gel. Especially I was talking about the CrossFit. I mean, if you're doing even strength training where you feel like you want that stimulant based effect like you get from a pre-workout, but you also want that consistent muscular energy from carbohydrate, the caffeinated gels work really well in that regard. I'm also really good for a morning run. I tell people it's carbs and caffeine in one shot, right? You don't have to worry about drinking the fluid with your coffee as well as trying to get the carbs in. It's just all in one, really easy to digest form. And it's also really something that people like to use late in the race. So oftentimes, before we had this caffeinated gel, I would hear from people, they were like, hey, I love using UCAN for most of my marathon. I like that consistent base of energy. But then later in the race, when things get really tough, mile 18 and beyond, like I want that immediate boost, and caffeine, it's one of the most studied legal performance enhancing drugs, right? It reduces the perception of fatigue. And so, that mental boost that you'll get now from the UCAN Edge with caffeine, a lot of people are finding that like, hey, it's not actually the sugar boost that they're needing at mile 18 or 20 of the marathon. Actually, the carbs from the UCAN gel plus the immediate caffeine boost is giving them exactly what they need. I will also acknowledge the fact that, there are people that do like that sugar boost later in the race and do like to combine UCAN and sugar-based fuels. And that's perfectly fine. We found people do that with pretty good success. What we typically recommend is, so UCAN's designed to give you that even stable base of energy. So if you were going to do that, it's best to sort of start with UCAN up front and kind of ride that stable wave for as much as possible. And then, later in the race, second half of the race, last quarter of the race, that's when you're taking those more sugary stuff because, you're not really, by the time you're sort of spiking and crashing enough times where it might bother you, you're hopefully done with your event. So that's where we found people We have seen people kind of mix and match and alternate, especially when you're doing really, really long stuff, ultras, Ironman triathlons, like it can get tiresome to be taking in the same thing, for 8, 10 plus hours. And in those situations, we have seen people kind of go back and forth. But I'd say if you're running a marathon or lower and you want to mix UCAN with sugary fuels, you're going to have the best success by starting up front with UCAN and then switching over to your sugar-based fuels later on. Let's talk a little bit about the UCAN energy powder. I mentioned off the top that it was kind of the foundational product. It's what we launched with. It was the first product from UCAN. Comes in 3 different flavors right now, soon to be a fourth one. Just kind of tease that, and it is the return of a popular flavor. So again, if we have people in here that have used UCAN for a while, you'll be happy to know that the cocoa UCAN is coming back very soon without the protein. But so the UCAN energy powder, I think about it in a couple ways. So if you're a runner or sort of doing any type of workout that doesn't necessitate fueling, well, I shouldn't say that. If I would just say if you are doing a workout where you're not carrying a water bottle with you, then thinking of this product as a preload is going to be the best way to use it. And even though it's a drink, like this is fuel, this is liquid food, more so than it is hydration. It's got 20 grams of carbs per serving, about 140 milligrams of sodium per serving. So it does have some electrolytes in it, but it's not intended to hydrate you. It's intended to fuel you. The powder can be pre-prepared in advance. I saw somebody just asked how many hours will the powder last once it's prepared. It'll last for up to 48 hours once you mix it with water. So a lot of people, with all this stuff, even the gels, I forgot to mention that, but you pop the gels in the fridge overnight and have one cold, or even pop it in the freezer when it's been so hot and take it out with you. It tastes amazing when it's cold. And similarly with the powder, I like to mix it up the night before, put it in the fridge, and then have it nice and cold the next morning. But yeah, this is the ideal preload. And we have many marathon runners, long distance athletes that are preloading with multiple servings of the energy powder before they go out. We have some of our elite marathon runners that are taking 2 to 3 servings, of this in the hour or two before the marathon, just kind of sipping on it over that period of time. And they're able to get in, 60 to 80 grams of really easy to digest carbs and energy sustaining carbs, carbs that will break down slowly over an extended period of time. Again, where it's not sort of just, loading up with a lot of sugar that's going to sit heavier in your stomach, or a lot of, trying to get in a ton of carbs from, foods that may be harder to digest or harder to access when you're on the road. And it's also a great way to mix things up, kind of like if you're targeting a certain carb threshold before your event, kind of getting some of that from food-based carbohydrates and then getting another, 20, 40, 60 grams of easy to digest carbs from the UCAN energy powder. Because again, you don't have to drink, 30 or 40 ounces of fluid in order to get in, 30 or 40 grams of carbs. Like, you could mix 2 scoops, 40 grams of carbs from the UCAN energy powder with 6 ounces of water. Yeah, and it would be really thick, but you could just get that down and it wouldn't sit heavy in your stomach. It would digest really easily. So that's an amazing sort of way to think of this as a really, really effective preload if you're doing longer stuff. And then I know we have cyclists and triathletes in here. This product works great in your bike bottle. So a lot of triathletes, they'll mix up, 3 to 4 servings, or even maybe say more than that, 6 servings in a bike bottle, and they'll basically have their 100 grams, 120 grams of carbs for a couple hours of riding. And again, I would challenge you, if you feel like, if you are going really long and you feel like, oh man, 100 grams of carbs, that's how much I'm trying to get in per hour. Again, maybe that'll be the case with you and UCAN, and that's perfectly reasonable if it is, but you might also find, because UCAN is breaking down more steadily, like you don't need to take in as many carbs as you were with sugary fuel. So you might be able to have, 100 or 120 grams of carbs in your bike bottle, and it's going to last you 3 hours, and you're more around that 40 gram of carb per hour instead of that 60, 80, 100 gram of carb per hour. But that only comes with testing and kind of understanding your own goals, your own intensity of effort, but I think we can kind of foundationally say that because this is more slow releasing and more steady release, that in most cases you don't need to take as much. In terms of being hyper precise with the numbers, that's something that everybody kind of comes to themselves. Um, let's just talk through a couple other products, and then I'm going to open it up to questions and answer a few questions that we have. The UCAN energy bars, these are more of an energy bar than a protein bar. They've got Live Steady as the primary carbohydrate, as the primary energy source. They do have some sugar in it. This is our only product that has sugar, 4 to 6 grams of sugar per bar. And they have 4 to 5 grams of protein per bar. So, for a lot of people, this ends up being a great pre-run snack. If you're doing the long ultra stuff, or if you're, kind of run walking a marathon, for example, and it's easier to chew during the stretches that you're walking. This can also be a great during fuel option for those longer efforts, or for those lower intensity efforts. The bars are all gluten-free, really easy on the stomach. They're also just a great everyday snack. The maintenance of blood sugar during your day can help with sugar cravings. It can help manage your energy during the day and kind of prevent those mid-afternoon lulls. So, a bar post lunchtime at 2 or 3 o'clock, that's something that could really carry you into the evening, especially if you're working out in the evening. You have a bar a little bit before you work out in the evening, then you go home and have dinner. It can be a very good sort of bridge product to give you the energy you need to work out, or just kind of carry you through those energy lulls in the middle of the day. We are thinking about some higher protein, more recovery bars, but right now the bars that UCAN has, I would definitely think of them as more of your energy bar versus your recovery bar or a protein bar. Let's talk about the UCAN product that does have the most protein. So our UCAN protein plus energy. So I touched on this a little bit before, but it is available in plant protein and whey protein options. We've got chocolate and vanilla with plant protein. We've got cookies and cream and cocoa with whey protein. So 20 grams of protein, 15 grams of carbs per serving. Really an ideal recovery product. When you are, an endurance athlete, when you're running high miles, you want to be able to get protein for muscle recovery. You also want to be able to replenish your glycogen, replenish your carbohydrate stores. And this does it kind of in that steady release way that UCAN is known for. So you've got the protein for your muscles, and then you've got that really nice and even keel trickle of carbohydrate coming in over the course of a couple hours, where a lot of people will tell us like, hey, when I have the UCAN protein right after a tough workout, I don't feel completely wiped out, an hour later. Whereas if you were just having, a protein powder with no carbs, or say you were having a protein powder and, with 10 to 15 grams of sugar as the carb source, like you might, certainly the protein is going to blunt the sugar spike, but you might burn through it quicker and kind of feel run down or hungry quicker than you do with the UCAN protein shake. It also works really well as a breakfast in terms of prior to long workout breakfast. So, a lot of people, like, if you think of what you might eat, eggs and toast before a long run, people might have, a bagel with some peanut butter on it to try to get some protein that way. This is kind of in a very drinkable, easy to digest format, giving you carbs and protein. So yeah, pre-long run, people might do a serving of the UCAN plus protein as breakfast, and then maybe taking a gel right before they start. And you're getting about, 35 grams of carbs, 20 grams of protein as your breakfast prior to exercise. It's also really, really great as the basis of a meal replacement shake. So on its own, our protein product, we don't have other nutrients or micronutrients to be a meal replacement on its own. But for many years now, I've started my day with the UCAN plus protein, unsweetened almond milk, spinach, nut butter, and a banana. And the presence of the Live Steady, the slow releasing starch in the shake with all these other nutrients, it really has an amazing blood sugar sustaining and energy sustaining effect, where you can have that and feel satiated for a few hours, provided you're adding in the other nutrients. And then on its own, certainly, like, other protein shakes can really work well as a snack or a bridge between meals. So this is really one of my favorite products, actually one of the most versatile products. Tastes really great too. I've had a lot of different plant proteins, especially. It's tough to get plant proteins always to not have that kind of earthy, muddy taste, but this one is really clean and smooth. Um, Finally, let's just talk through the UCAN Hydrate. So UCAN Hydrate's our only product without Live Steady. It's an electrolyte replacement, no sugar, no calories. So roughly 300 milligrams of sodium, 100 plus milligrams of potassium per serving. It's sweetened with stevia, so there's no artificial ingredients. It has no dyes, no colors, so it's really light, really smooth. This is a great sort of, kind of anytime hydration product. You can certainly use it during exercise. People like to preload with it, kind of get the electrolytes in sometimes before they work out. Certainly as a daily hydration product, given that it doesn't have sugar, it's something that you can kind of have, anytime and not feel worried about consuming, a lot of additional sugar from that standpoint. People like mixing it with our energy powder. Like I mentioned, the energy powder has some sodium in it, about 140 milligrams. But if you're a heavy sweater, if you like to just kind of have all your fuel and hydration in one drinkable mix, add. I really like the orange energy powder with the watermelon hydrate. Kind of gives a nice tropical mixed flavor. And that's right there. You've got 20 grams of carbs and about 450 milligrams of sodium per serving. The hydrate also has 50 milligrams of magnesium, which is more magnesium than most of your hydration products. Magnesium, can help aid in energy production. It can help reduce fatigue. So magnesium is an important electrolyte that, when our Bob Seebahar, a sports dietitian who was formerly dietitian for the U.S. Olympic team, when he formulated our hydration product, one of the things he really wanted to ensure was that there was adequate magnesium because he felt that was lacking in a lot of other electrolyte products that are being used by endurance athletes, especially during exercise. So yeah, hydrate, it's a very, very good complement to any of the other UCAN products. You can, we have many, many people that use Edge gels for their carbs and the UCAN hydrate for electrolytes, whether they're preloading with the hydrate or whether they're carrying a flask, hand carrying a bottle, and they have the hydrate mixed up in there. It works very well in conjunction with any of the carbohydrate based UCAN products. Um, so just in summary, before I answer any questions, I know this is a little bit running tailored, but with UCAN in general, if we're thinking about sort of your race fueling, if we're talking about a 5K or a 10K, or again, even a sprint triathlon, if you're a cyclist, or again, a CrossFit workout, sort of a 1 hour or so effort, pre-fueling with the powder, the bar, or even the gel is often going to be adequate. And you don't need to really think about fuel during. Now, certainly with the 10K, if you're pushing 90 minutes, if you're pushing even over an hour, you could consider certainly doing a gel halfway through. But for most of these efforts, the pre-fueling with UCAN is going to be what sets you up for success. When we think about the half marathon, we want to stick with the pre-fueling, and then it's a serving of the UCAN powder or a UCAN gel roughly every 45 to 60 minutes. Again, for a lot of people, that ends up sort of being one before, one halfway through, that carries you through till the end. If you're, kind of anywhere between, 90 minutes to 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hours and 30 minutes. And, if it's longer than that, then you kind of stick to that plan of roughly one serving of UCAN every hour. And again, make sure you start with that pre-race, pre-exercise serving of UCAN. Then with the marathon, it's really, really the same. And I would actually say this on this slide, this is a mistake. If for the marathon, for a lot of people, I would suggest perhaps cutting that serving of edge down to every 45 to 60 minutes. A lot of times in the bulk of your training, you might not be running at the same an effort that you will be during your race. So, in training, you might find that you're using it every 60 to 75 minutes, but I'd say do at least a few simulation workouts where you are using the gel a little bit more frequently in training. Make sure you can stomach it. I think most people find success if you're using the gel primarily every 45 to 60 minutes during a marathon. And then really for anything longer than that, when we're talking about triathlon, when we're talking about ultras, it is a lot of experimentation, but and you also we'll probably have more of an opportunity to mix and match products, right? Again, like we talked about, when you're out there for 8, 10, 12, 14 hours, like you're probably going to want food and some solids at some point. So the nice thing about the UCAN, the powder, the bar, the gel, they're relatively interchangeable. So whatever one you're using, you kind of think about using it every 45 to 60 minutes. And then again, there's sort of the opportunity to double up and say, like, okay, if I'm going to take 2 servings at once, that might last me, you know, roughly 1.5 to 2x as long as 1 serving, right? So if you're taking 2 servings of the powder before and it's going to last you about 1.5 to 2 times as long, then maybe the first time you fuel during is 90 minutes in, or yeah, 90 minutes in, or a little bit longer than that. You have to play around and see exactly how that works for you, but that's the basic idea behind it. Um, in terms of UCAN and high level why it works for endurance, right? We've talked about this, but it's fewer energy crashes, especially during long effort. It's the no GI distress from the sugar overload. So a lot of people, just having to take in sugar so frequently, that's gonna cause GI issues, or the texture of the traditional gels. And then it really is this confidence in your fueling plan. And this was something that Dakota Popin, one of the athletes we work with, US Olympian in the marathon, she was saying this to us a couple months ago, but she was telling us when she was fueling with sugar, she had to be so precise because she was kind of riding that roller coaster. So if she missed a bottle during her race, it would be like full panic mode because she knew that she was like, always kind of on the verge of that low unless she fueled back up. Whereas with UCAN, she says, because the energy is so much more even, as long as she knows that she's taking in enough beforehand and then, getting at least a few bottles early on, she's so much less concerned about missing a bottle or how precise she has to be or counting carbs because everything is just much more even at a baseline. So there's a lot of like more confidence that I think you can gain, and less like panic if everything isn't so precise when you are, working with the UCAN fueling plan because of that stability and energy. And then just finally, in terms of energy for everyday life, like I think starting the day with the UCAN protein powder or a UCAN bar, that's a great sort of application for UCAN. If you're not much of a breakfast person or you don't have time to sort of make yourself a real food breakfast, then this can be a good supplement instead of that on certain mornings. Bar, or you can hydrate to beat the crash in the afternoon. Sometimes that crash can also be just being dehydrated, or your electrolytes being off, especially in this heat, or especially if you're really active. So those are great opportunities to use either of those products. And just in general, because UCAN is designed not for high octane energy, but for blood sugar stability, it's something that does support, the type of energy that you want when you're not active, right? Which is like when we're not like when you're active and exercising, those are probably one of the few times, and you don't want to overdo it, but that's when you probably want that high octane energy at the most, where, in our day-to-day life, we want to be stable. We want to have our blood sugar stable. And that's really what UCAN was founded on and what it supports. So yeah, there's a really an opportunity, around meals to have UCAN as that bridge to get you from one meal to the next. So with that, I really appreciate the time. I've talked to you guys here for about 40 minutes. We did have some questions coming in that I wanted to answer. This is also your time to ask us anything about fueling with UCAN. Appreciate those of you who have stuck around for so long and been part of this. So I'll just kind of scroll through a few of these questions. We had Christine say, not hungry before long runs. What should I take? So yeah, Christine, that's a great, I mean, for a lot of people, I think, especially depending on when you're running, it can just be tough for people to eat, either because they're nervous about how something will sit in their stomach, or you're running in the morning and you're simply not hungry first thing in the morning. I think the UCAN energy powder is really a great product to kind of take in lieu of food. It's very light, digests very easily. It'll still give you the carbohydrates, so you're not under fueling or going into that run without any carbs. But it is either that or the gel are probably the easiest to digest and the lightest UCAN product. So those are what I would recommend. Um, we had somebody else ask about the use of allulose as a sweetener in the UCAN product. So allulose is used as a sweetener in the UCAN gels. It's a couple grams of allulose in each gel. And the question was, I'm sensitive to sugar alcohols. I'm concerned UCAN will give me GI upset. It is something that's very individual. I'd say because of the amount of sugar alcohols, the allulose that's used in the gels, it's not very high. Like by and large, the feedback with UCAN and the reason people convert to UCAN and use UCAN gels is because of how easy they are on the stomach. Because for most people, it is those simple sugars that do cause the GI issues. You'd obviously have to test that for yourself. I will say if you are sensitive to sugar alcohols, none of the energy powders have any sugar alcohols. They're sweetened with either stevia or monk fruit. So those could be a good option for you. Preloading with the energy powders. Obviously, they're not as easy to carry with you on the go as the gels are, but depending on your sport, if you're a cyclist, obviously then you have a bottle and the energy powders are super easy. So yeah, if allulose is a concern, I would say give the gels a try, especially the non-caffeinated ones. They have less allulose than the ones with caffeine. That ones with caffeine have a gram or two more. So I'd say start with the non-caffeinated gels, see how that works for you, and if that doesn't work well for you, then certainly switching over to the powder would be good. Um, we had another person ask if UCAN has a protein product. Might have joined us late. We do have the Protein Plus Energy product with 20 grams of protein per serving. There are plant-based and whey-based options. Yeah, the Energy Plus Protein, that's the recovery product. That's the high protein product from UCAN and works really well for recovery and in everyday shakes. Let's see. We had another question asking, should we be concerned about A1C as non-diabetics? It seems like the starch can maintain a baseline of energy with shorter acting carbs on top of it, as I typically recommend 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. So two good points. So um, I will say, I mean, that's it is, I guess, a little bit individual. I mean, I say that everyone probably should be aware, especially as you get older, of your A1C and kind of just knowing where it's at a baseline. If it is something you personally are concerned about, then can certainly be part of the solution in terms of being a more stable, controlled glucose source of fuel, especially if you are active and having, a lot of high sugar fueling. If in consulting with the sports dietitian you work with or your doctor, it's something they tell you not to worry about, then certainly then I would say that's not something, you have to consider in terms of why you would use UCAN. For you, it would be more about like, is it gonna, sustain my energy and is it easier on my stomach? And then the idea of adding UCAN kind of being a base fuel and adding like quicker acting carbs as a mix with UCAN, that's interesting. We have a lot of especially like high performance triathletes, or high performance cyclists who are trying to get more volume of carbs per hour, mix UCAN in the same bottle with a maltodextrin or a sugar-based carb, and basically instead of having to take in 90 grams of sugar per hour, they're able to say, 60 grams of UCAN with 30 grams of sugar per hour. And over the long term, they feel like they're getting enough carbs that they need. They have that even base of energy from UCAN, and it all works well together. So yeah, I think depending certainly on the activity and the intensity, if you are an athlete with a higher carbohydrate demand, you could certainly try mixing UCAN in with other faster acting carbs to get you to that higher threshold. Well, I appreciate all the questions. Great questions. If there's not anything else, I just wanted to end with a couple key takeaways. So with UCAN, it's all about that clean, steady energy without sugar, that ability to control blood sugar in a very even way. It's also matching your fuel to your training and lifestyle. A lot of people who come into endurance sports, they're not fueling or eating a ton of sugar in their day-to-day life necessarily. So suddenly the demands of what you're fueling with for your sport kind of really like raise that significantly. So UCAN's a way, again, if that is of interest to you in doing this without consuming a high amount of sugar, this is a way to still fuel, still get carbohydrates. We're not talking about depriving your body. We're not talking about under fueling. We're not talking about low carb. UCAN is a carb based product. It's just a different type of carb and a more steady carb. So this is a way to still fuel and get carbs in without taking in so much sugar. And finally, it's just a way to have more control over your energy. So much of the time, when energy is haywire and blood sugar is all over the place, performance can be all over the place as well. And lack of proper fueling can be one of the biggest limiters to performance. With UCAN, we have a lot of people, especially again, as you get into this longer stuff like triathletes, Ironman triathletes, who tell us, I didn't have to go into the race sort of guessing about how my fuel would digest or guessing whether or not I could take in enough. Like I knew what I was doing with UCAN, that variable was eliminated. So yeah, with that, I know we have a lot of people that have were in here that have already used the product. Maybe some of this was a review for you all. Hopefully you learn something new about the product, or there was some takeaway in terms of what else you might be able to do with UCAN. As a thanks for spending your time with us. You certainly didn't have to do that this afternoon. We do want to extend a special 30% discount to you through the end of the day Friday, starting now through the end of the day Friday. That's 30% off with code webinar. You will get an email of this recording here in a little bit, and I will put the code in the email as well. But if you go to our site, use code webinar at checkout. That's exclusive just for people who joined us here today, and you will get 30% off through the end of Friday. Let's see, to close us out, we got a couple more questions. Somebody asked, when you say the powder before early run, you mean the energy powder? Yeah, that's correct. If you're looking for something, we have two powdered products, the hydration powder and the energy powder. The energy powder is the one with carbs and with the Live Steady. So if we're talking about fuel and energy for workouts and for runs, then the energy powder is definitely the one you want to go with. The hydration powder is the electrolytes, and also could certainly be consumed before a run, but the purpose there would be for hydration and to get the electrolytes in, not to get the calories and the carbs in. But yeah, with that, thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate you joining us. Feel free to hit us up on social media, shoot us an email if you have any questions. We're going to try to do more of these sessions over the course of the next few months, especially as we're kind of in the peak training season, some different topics, some different guests. So if you do subscribe to our email, stay tuned for that as well. You will be getting a few more of these, and hopefully there's something that piques your interest. And we always welcome the feedback. So you will get, like I mentioned, an email from me with the recording of this webinar. If you have any feedback, good or bad, please send it my way. If you have any additional questions, please send them my way. We really appreciate everybody's time. Thanks so much for spending the afternoon with us. I'm Varun from UCAN.